Okay, good afternoon and welcome everyone to the Data Quality Campaign ESSA Summer Playlist. My name is Brendan McMahon-Parton and I am joined by my colleague Rachel Anderson. We are excited to beat the heat by talking opportunities to make data work for students in the Every Student Succeeds Act. Before I take it too far, just a couple of quick housekeeping things. One, that if you're joining us via the Google Hangout, please use the Q&A box on the side of your screen to ask questions. We'll be monitoring those and dealing with them throughout the webinar. If you're joining us on YouTube, use the YouTube comments box. It'll be nice for there to be some friendly, close-related questions on YouTube for the citizen comments. And finally, if you are on Twitter, please tweet along with us using the hashtag ESSA. You can hope you can find us on there. Like I said, this is our ESSA Summer Playlist. We are going to be talking across 6 webinars about different opportunities to make data work for kids in the federal education law. It's really a summer-long conversation about ESSA. And this is the first in our series, and we're going to be talking in the following about 5 other topics. You'll see just highlighting what all of these issues will be. I know next up we're going to be talking about here. We'll hopefully tune in through the entire series, not just today. So I'm going to turn to my colleague Rachel here and talk a little bit about what's saying us as an opportunity to do what?
That's a pretty fair question. So ESSA really does represent an opportunity for anyone to know what a powerful tool data can be, and in the case of what we're discussing today, what a powerful tool communicating effectively with families and communities can be. And the reason that ESSA is such an opportunity for this is because ESSA really is a data bill. Really what they may have started before and build on it with the new opportunities that this law provides. But really, it also provides you opportunities outside of what you're doing for ESSA. This is really a time to re-examine your state goals and see how this guidance and what you're building on for ESSA can contribute to that goal. So before we dive right into what we recommend and maybe some things to think about, Brendan is going to explain a little bit about what priorities to keep in mind, and also conveniently how data quality campaigns do recommendations instead of 4 policy priorities can really help you organize this work.
Absolutely. As you, if you're a state, if you're an advocate, just someone who cares about the Every Student Succeeds Act, there are really 4 major things that we can keep keeping in mind as you pursue policies and practices to implement this new education law. First is, and I think it's really important one, is this is an opportunity to reset the conversation in space. You know, whether you view ESSA as something dramatically different or something that maybe just sort of tinkered around the edges, you do have the opportunity to reset the conversation in your state and help people think differently about what's required, what's new, what's different in education policy in your state. Another thing, and really important from our perspective at the Data Quality Campaign, is that this is an opportunity to use data in different ways. I think one of the things about No Child Left Behind that really started to be the rub with people on No Child Left Behind is that it was the same data for all purposes. Math and reading was about accountability, was about transparency, was about continuous improvement. Now, as you're resetting that conversation, you also can think about how, you know, the data that belongs in your accountability system may be different than the data that you use in transparency, although those should go heavily hand in hand, and then different data points that schools and districts can really use to continuously improve outcomes for their students. It doesn't have to be one size fits all when it comes to measures anymore.
Another thing states really need to consider is meeting their data system where it is. So whether you think of this as like, gosh, you know, we're gonna have to collect some new data, or no big deal, these are flags we already have in our system, and every state might fall somewhere on that continuum. Just really being smart about what data do we already have and how can we maximize its use. It doesn't have to be about new burdensome collection. It can be a lot about maximizing the data that states have been collecting. And finally, and I think this one is really, really important, is engaging stakeholders. So it's actually required in ESSA that states do stakeholder engagement, but this shouldn't just be about a compliance exercise. This should be about thinking outside of the box, you know, not just the usual suspects who are at your summer roundtable or whatever, not just going on a listening tour, but reaching out to communities, to families, and listening to their needs, and demonstrating to them as state leaders how you listen and what you did with that information. I think this is going to really make or break quality implementation on this law, is the quality of state stakeholder engagement. So as Rachel so astutely pointed out, yes, there is a new federal education law, and a lot of states are going to be turning their attention to developing these accountability plans and really working to all those things I just said, reset the conversation, meeting their data system where they are, doing stakeholder engagement. And the Data Quality Campaign handily has a new set of policy recommendations for states that really will help them put data to work for students. And while the 4 policy priorities were not written as an implementation guide for ESSA, we do know, not even think, that they'll help states meet the obligations required under ESSA, but also go above and beyond to really make sure that data is working for kids. And we're asking policymakers, for leaders across the country, really at the federal, state, and local level, to meet 4 priorities. One is to measure what matters. That means to be clear about what you want to achieve for students and have the data to ensure that it gets done. This one is so important in light of concerns and like, you know, some of the backlash that we've been hearing, demonstrating that you're measuring what matters. 2 is make data use possible. Provide teachers and leaders with the flexibility, the training, and the support they need to answer their questions and take action. So making sure that data is really in the hands of people in support of student learning. 3, and what we'll be focusing on a lot today and talking about public reporting, is be transparent and earn trust. Ensure that every community understands how its schools and students are doing, why data is valuable, and critically how it's protected and used in service of kids. And finally, guarantee access and protect privacy. Provide teachers and parents timely information for their students and make sure that it's kept safe. So that's secure, trustworthy data in the hands of people, all to foster student learning. So we've given you quite a bit to think about right now, some things to consider. So let's talk a little bit more about, with this frame in mind, what's in ESSA and why it's important.
Great. So there are 4 main things that we want to highlight that are in ESSA with regard to public reporting. And the first one is sort of new, but actually sort of not that new. Like under No Child Left Behind, states and districts have to produce school report cards. But what's new now is that under ESSA, there's really a new focus, as Brendan mentioned, to engaging parents and also producing and reporting more information that helps give people a more nuanced and contextual picture of how their schools are doing. Along with this new responsibility to make these public report cards more useful, there is a little bit more money. In the state assessment grants, there are some funds available to help design state and local report cards and make them truly something that's easy and usable and accessible for the public.
This is really huge, right?
Yes.
We know at GQC, and I'm sure many of you, if you're following state policy, or even if you're just someone who's trying to find out how your kid's school is doing, the quality of the information that states are providing out there really, really varies. And some of it is pretty hard to find. A few years ago, we did a quick look at how easy it was to find state report cards and how easy the language was on the report cards was to access and read. And one state, it took 32 clicks to get to this data.
Yeah, we had one very brave intern.
Very brave intern.
But every parent shouldn't have to be that brave to find out how their schools are doing.
That's right. In an era when you pick a restaurant, you pick a car, you even pick the person that you're going to date, using the internet, finding out clear, trustworthy information about your student's school or maybe your future child's school shouldn't take that much digging. And that's why I think that stakeholder engagement, again, is so important, that this is really about empowering parents and families and communities with information.
Right. And that's a great lead into our next point, which is that in order to make this public reporting more useful, states are now required to engage parents. This, of course, has always been good practice, but as Brenda mentioned before, it is now required. So states have to work with parents to develop their state report cards. In addition, there are some fairly flexible funds, as I mentioned, that can help sort of do this work and engage parents in a meaningful way that's not just checking the box and moving on, but is actually hearing from parents what they need. And we also want to highlight a really small provision that can be really powerful, which is that the law requires state report cards to include any additional information that the state believes will be of use to parents in the community. So if you want to really take advantage of that, you need to talk to the community and find out what would be useful for them.
Absolutely. You know, it's not often that the law prescribes that we do something really powerful and meaningful, but this focus on stakeholder engagement, particularly on parent engagement, is really kind of a triumph of this law. It'll be interesting to see how states take advantage of it, because you've got to know it feels daunting from that state agency perspective. And I think, you know, back to that, any other information deemed critical, that's also part of the accountability system for states, that they're required to think about this so-called fifth indicator. They have lots of options across different kinds of non-academic and engagement information. And what a great form in the stakeholder engagement when you're thinking about transparency and high quality public reporting, to ask communities what measures of student success are important to them.
Right. It really is an opportunity to keep reporting on those consistent indicators that are well established and that we know help to understand quality, but also listening to people in your community and seeing what matters to them as well.
Yeah, one thing we know from leading states, what they just got, like Illinois, they discovered in their parent engagement is, yeah, sure, we need that academic information up front. We also want to know, does the school have yoga? So I think that bigger side-by-side picture of extracurriculars, academic performance, that paint that whole picture of school climate and student success.
Right. And to help back up the quality of that data that you're putting out with parent engagement, brings us to the always exciting topic of disaggregation and crosstabs. Certainly you've heard this before, even from us, but it bears repeating. The law now requires states to disaggregate student data in new ways that can really help policymakers and the public understand how different groups of students are doing and how our schools are serving them. So as a quick reminder, ESSA now requires states to track and report on how well homeless students, students in foster care, and military-connected students are doing. And also USCG will be providing guidance to states who are interested in further disaggregating some of their AAPI groups, the Asian American and Pacific Islander groups, which obviously a very varied population, and for certain states, disaggregating that data further can really help them understand their students. And finally, ESSA requires states to be able to provide information to the public in a way that can be crosstabs, meaning that you can look at the intersection of different types of student groups. So for example, Hispanic male students, or students with a disability who are also ELL students. So there's different ways to understand some of the more nuanced populations that our schools are serving.
Yeah, the crosstab is that really wonky word, but really what we're saying is, you know, we've spent 14 years under is that right? 14 years under No Child Left Behind now, asking people to take a look at what student subgroup, you know, student demographic performance is. And it's like, if you give a mouse a cookie, they're gonna want a glass of milk. Once we got this information out here, people wanted to know more. They wanted that even more detailed picture about how schools are serving different groups of students. I think there's been so much conversation lately too about discipline rates and those kind of things. People are hungry to dig into these trends. The important part is not that just we examine these trends on the surface, but then empower schools through data, one might say, to actually make change and do supports and interventions on the other side. I think that goes back to why that different data for different purposes is so important, that schools need to see this not just as a gotcha, but a tool they can use to really help their kids.
Right, and some of this work is a challenge, but the effort that states put into it now will pay off, because they will have that data that people can use to make actual decisions for students.
Totally. Yeah. Another thing we really think this is an opportunity for states to do is, you're thinking about this crosstabs. One really interesting way, we encourage states to develop useful tools as well, but another really great tool that states could put out for their communities is an open data set, something that's de-identified, you know, really clean, secure, private, confidential, all that really important stuff that community organizations and advocates can take and help you flesh out that picture of student success even further. That can be scary sometimes because it does open you up to critical friends using the data, but what a better way to be transparent and earn that trust of community members than by saying, here's our data, go learn from it, right?
Yeah. Yes.
What else?
Funny you should ask. So the fourth thing that we want to highlight that ESSA really says about public reporting is a set of what we're calling almost hidden gems. So additional indicators that maybe aren't getting a ton of attention but can be really powerful. The first one is per pupil expenditures. So ESSA requires state report cards to include district level and school level per pupil expenditures. And if you're wondering how to do that, we are having a whole webinar just on that topic, so keep following the playlist. Some other sort of hidden gems of these sort of silently powerful indicators that ESSA now requires. Post-secondary enrollment is now going to be in state report cards, as is growth data and chronic absence data. Not all of these things are part of state accountability plans necessarily, but they are going to be publicly reported and used in different ways. And we'll also be having a whole other webinar to talk about post-secondary enrollment, growth data, and chronic absence. So stay tuned.
Yeah, silent no more.
Yes, silent no more, exactly.
So as states are thinking about pursuing these requirements, what do you think are some of the other things they need to consider putting these things in their report cards?
Right, so this might sound easy, although does it sound easy? I don't know.
I don't think it does.
It does not even sound easy.
This is a big task.
It is, but we have developed some considerations that we hope can be helpful to states as they're thinking through how to approach incorporating all of these new indicators and really making their public reporting something powerful and useful in communities. The first one is accessibility. So really just ensuring that target audiences can find the data. Make sure that if you don't have to spend an hour and a half Googling stuff and clicking forever through a state report, through a state website like our intern. Make sure that if a parent has 5 minutes after the kids go to bed and just wants to know if schools are working, that they can go on and find this information. The second one that's related is kind of this issue of language and ease of use. So data needs to be available to parents in a way that they can use it. So you might design a really beautiful interactive website, and depending on your community, that may be great, but maybe you also need to provide something in paper. Maybe you also need to translate what you're providing into other languages based on your community. So making a really beautiful website is wonderful, but you also need to think about who in your community is really using this data and how you can be serving them based on their needs.
In the spirit of practicing what we preach, I have to do a little plug that TPC will be releasing an infographic in Spanish, I think here shortly. If you've ever seen our What is Student Data infographic, and if not, please check it out. That will be coming out in Spanish with that very purpose, to serve the needs of these broader communities and broader stakeholders.
Yes. And part of also making the language and the actual functionality of the report card useful to people is including some definitions. Parents shouldn't have to be confronted with a huge array of acronyms and words that they don't understand and don't know what to do with. It's a pretty low lift to just define the terms that you're using in simple language and make that information more useful to parents by allowing them to understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, in that same vein, so many report cards that are meeting the needs of No Child Left Behind have words like AOIP, Safe Harbor, TVOS, to call out my own home state of Tennessee. Those are all important and useful terms to some of us, but not even just defining that language, but rethinking what language you use on the front end could be huge in helping people really trust this information.
Exactly. The third area after accessibility and language or ease of use that we want to highlight as sort of broader considerations for doing this work is this idea of data visualization. So literally, how are you presenting the information, whether it's a website or on paper? You really want to be deliberate and think about how people are going to interact with whatever you're providing and how they're going to find things. This can be as something as simple and easy as making your colors and design consistent so that when people are looking through different pieces of the website or different pieces of paper, they feel like they're looking at a consistent story and not trying to piece together different things. But this can also be something a little bit more complex and something that you hit on earlier, which is almost this idea of layering data. So if a parent has 5 minutes and they just want to find out one thing about their school, they can do that. And then maybe if someone wants to find out a little bit more about comparisons or diving into different types of populations, they can do that. And then on the other end of the spectrum, if someone really wants that open data set that they can sort of engage with and find their own conclusions and answers, they can do that as well. So really think about not only the way your materials look, but also the way people are going to interact with them, how easy it is to carry out different ways to interact with it, and how people can find different answers and different levels of detail that they're looking for.
This really is going to take smart, thoughtful effort on behalf of states, and we're really looking forward to seeing what states come out with. In that vein, if you're familiar with the DQC, you know that in the past we've annually done a survey of all 50 states aligned to our policy recommendations. As I said at the top, the 4 policy priorities to make data work for students is our new set of policy recommendations for states. And this year, actually going on right now, is our first year of measuring how states are doing against some of these recommendations. And one of the very first things that we're going to be looking at is state report cards. So we're in kind of a baseline year right now, doing an analysis of all 50 states in the District of Columbia about all those things Rachel just said. Is it accessible, easy to find? Does the language make sense to the average user? Do the visuals make sense, as I always say, for a 2016 internet reality? How high quality are these things? And we know this is going to be a baseline year because we know already from talking to states that they're already starting to think about how to revamp this, how to do more, how to do better, and engaging with those stakeholders to see what it's like. So we're going to have a first year of data this year, and then we expect to see some changes in the 2017 year, which is exciting.
And also some best practices that other states can learn from as we begin to identify states who have really already started to put in some thinking about this.
Absolutely. You need the art of the possible on something like this because it is a big task, but it definitely is possible.
Yeah. So given those considerations, Brendan, now you have the hard part. How do you do it?
Well, states have the hardest part, but we do have a few things that absolutely states should be considering, advocates should be considering as you're watching how states do the work. And they fall across really 4 policy and practice areas: engagement, ensuring data quality, protecting privacy. I think we've said it multiple times across this episode of the playlist already, is that stakeholder engagement, really getting out there and talking to parents, communities, taxpayers, is going to be critical to this. And I think the other thing that's important too is just to think about is not just for ESSA implementation, not just for your report card, but ongoing. This isn't a one-time thing. This isn't a one-time big sparkly listening tour. Real engagement means you got to keep checking in. We hear from states over and over again, they'll give teachers access to their data, or they'll give a report card. And you want to know what happens next? People call them and say they want more and they want different. And that can be so scary and daunting, but that's really how we pursue excellence in making data work for students, is that continuous improvement on the part of the leader, not just asking them to continuously improve down in schools and classrooms. And I also want to stress this opportunity to think outside the box of who you usually bring to the table in stakeholder engagement. I think every state could probably sit back and say, and name off their usual suspects. Those people are important, but what communities haven't you engaged? Is there need to do an urban-rural balance? Are there, we talked about AAPI, some quote subgroup populations that you need to think about or talk to as you're doing the stakeholder engagement. So such a great chance for states to really shine and get out there with their citizens and learn what good looks like.
And really build allies for continuing this work together.
Absolutely.
It is daunting, but if you brought in the community and have them working with you, it can become a little bit less scary, I think.
Absolutely. It's all about trust. And of course, that doesn't mean that people are only going to tell you nice things, but it's a learning process nonetheless.
Yeah.
And at DQC, we so believe in partnership and stakeholder engagement. We know the feeling. The other is data quality. I think, probably all of you are sitting back, if you've ever thought much about data and going, well, it's going to be garbage in, garbage out. We're going to make these beautiful new report cards, and how can we trust the validity and reliability of the information? And that's a perfectly valid concern. If we want people to trust this information, we must make sure that it's high quality. But I also will say there's no better way to get data quality than putting it out there. That's when schools and districts want to pause and take another look and say, hey, is this the picture that we're painting? Is this the right, accurate information? So really building in those opportunities for districts to do quality checks on the information before it goes live. I think that goes back to the trust thing too, because then they don't feel like it's a gotcha. Mm-hmm. So the information is quality and they've had a chance to review what's in that report card before it goes live. And in some ways know what they're up against. Yeah. Know what they really have left to work on for their kids. The third piece is protecting student data privacy. So whenever these days you're thinking about getting information out and using information, it's so critical to also make sure that you're doing everything you can to appropriately protect and secure that information. I'll just say a lot of the conversation when it comes to public reporting is often about in size and how big or how small, and we would push states and push advocates to think a little bit outside of that box. That's one critically important element of protecting students' privacy, security, and confidentiality, but it's not the only vehicle, it's not the only tool states have in their toolbox as they think about getting information out. And fourth is governance. This is sort of the behind the scenes but critically important way for states to make sure that if you need, for instance, cross-agency linkages to be able to get information out. Rachel talked about post-secondary enrollment a couple of minutes ago, that sort of K-12 to post-secondary pipeline. You need that P20W, in other words, pre-K through K-12 through post-secondary in the workforce, governance body who's really responsible and in charge of making sure all this other stuff that I just said, the qualities data, that the policies are in place to protect it, that the stakeholders have really been engaged. The buck really is meant to stop with that P20W data governance body. You think how many times I've said that in my life that it would flow out easily, but clearly not. We have great recommendations on DQC's website for the types of policies and practices that these should take on. So recommend checking that out. And like I said, it's kind of behind the scenes. It's not always that sexy of a thing to talk about when you're thinking about doing something great for kids, but it is really important for making sure that the quality, security, and engagement pieces of this work are met.
Exactly. It's really the governance that lets you keep updating what you're doing. If you need to report one post-secondary indicator, you just make that one link that you need.
Right.
But if you want to continue to be able to provide more and more accurate data and respond to what people in the community are asking for, you really need that governance body to help you make decisions over time.
Absolutely. And as always, if you're out there looking for great examples of any of the things that we're talking about, including governance, we're always happy to connect you with some of the states who we see are really leading on this work and leading what good governance, what good public reporting, any of it looks like. And for more on all of this, I recommend you checking out DQC's policy brief on public reporting. We're also that has a lot of the details about some of the stuff we just talked about. We're also fans of the Education Trust's one-pager that talks about what the public reporting requirements in ESSA are. So that's certainly not the full suite of resources that you should check out, but just a couple of things to point to. So I said at the beginning, if anyone in the audience does have questions, please feel free to let us know. Rachel and I are always happy to talk to each other, but we're always happy to answer people's questions as well.
Yes, and if you have a question come to you later, feel free to use the hashtag that Brendan mentioned, ESSAOPPS, ESSAOPS, and we can continue the conversation offline as well.
Do you think that sounds like secret ops and like
yeah, that's why it's
operations instead of opportunities? We didn't mean it that way. It's opportunity.
It sounds cool though.
It does sound cool. our ESSA hashtag is really cool, and you can quote us on that. So just taking the time to wrap up our first session in our ESSA playlist, I just want to reinforce a few things. One is that we really believe that Every Student Succeeds Act in many ways is a data bill. It reinforces the legacy of No Child Left Behind, or even the original Elementary and Secondary Education Act, that we want to use information to ensure that every student, no matter their zip code, has a high quality education that can lead them to great things in life. We certainly believe in the power of data to help support that work in the hands of parents and teachers and leaders leaders. We're excited to see that echoed in this new federal education law. And like I said, so excited to see what states do with it. Again, we really believe that this is an opportunity to reset the conversation about education in states. You're going to be doing deep and powerful and meaningful stakeholder engagement. You're going to be able to talk about the role of the state and education policy in new ways. And what an opportunity, particularly as there's new policymakers, but also just as a responsibility to constituents to really help people understand what's the vision in your state for making sure that every student succeeds. One other thing I'll say, we are talking about ESSA, that's a law. States are going to have accountability plans that are due to the feds. That does feel like really a moment in time, but this is not just a moment in time. This is an opportunity to think about the long game. And we talked, Rachel talked about using that stakeholder engagement to continuously going back and what else do you need to know? What are our questions now? Are we still serving our students? Thinking beyond just this, our accountability plan is due next spring, to what are our long-term goals for the students in our state? How do we get there, and what information do we need? It's going to be just practice, to be honest. And finally, data quality campaign and our 4 policy priorities are going to help you meet the letter of the law as a state, and they're also going to help you go above and beyond. As we talk across this, and each week as we talk across our 4 policy priorities, you'll see that there are a lot of places in ESSA that are aligned with our recommendations for state, but there is one missing piece around guaranteeing access and protecting privacy. And so states are really going to need to pick up the mantle and make sure that data gets into the hands of those closest to students, teachers, parents, students themselves, not because the federal education law tells them to, although it didn't, but because they know that's how we improve outcomes for kids. So thank you so much for joining and tuning in with us today to beat the heat of talking about the Every Student Succeeds Act. We hope that you'll join us on July 13th, Wednesday, July 13th at 3 p.m., where we're going to be discussing how the Every Student Succeeds Act is an opportunity for state leaders to support strong teachers and school leaders. Check out our event page, dataqualitycampaign.org/events to learn more, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you. Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, Brennan.